You might know this feeling. You're physically tired, irritable, or just empty, even though on paper your life is perfectly fine. It's a modern kind of soul exhaustion. When that emptiness hits, our instinct is to look outward. We check where we stand. We look at a friend who just had their third child, or a colleague who bought a house, and we wonder why we haven't hit those exact same milestones. But using other people's lives as a yardstick only guarantees stress. It blocks you from figuring out what actually satisfies you, and it traps you in a cycle of constant inadequacy. To understand how to break this cycle, we have to look back at the years right after World War II. For decades, the entire field of psychology was consumed by treating severe trauma and deep psychological disorders. The system was built to diagnose pathology. The ultimate goal was to take a suffering patient and bring them out of the negative zone, back up to a functional baseline of 0. But treating a mental illness is not the same as building a fulfilling life. Curing a negative does not automatically produce a positive. That specific realization drove Dr. Martin Seligman to create a new branch of study. Instead of solely obsessing over mental illness, Seligman championed positive psychology, a science dedicated entirely to understanding how human beings actually flourish. But before we can construct Seligman's version of a happy life, we have to dismantle a massive psychological roadblock that keeps people trapped at a neutral or negative baseline. It's a condition called learned helplessness. If you experience repeated failures at a specific task, your brain eventually gives up and convinces you that you are entirely incapable of succeeding, no matter how hard you try. This diagram illustrates how a pessimistic mind distorts reality. First, it takes a single negative event, like a failed test or a bad interview, and interprets it as permanent. It tells you the situation is fixed and will stay like this forever. Then the mind views that failure as total. Failing that one test doesn't just mean you struggle with a specific subject, it infects your entire routine, convincing you that your whole existence is a failure. Finally, it takes that failure and makes it strictly personal. You assume the bad outcome happened because of a deep internal flaw in your character, rather than a circumstantial error you can fix. By interpreting every setback as permanent, total, and personal, you effectively lock yourself inside a psychological prison. You cut off your own path to genuine satisfaction. To break out of that prison, Seligman leaned on the work of Dr. Albert Ellis, a psychologist who mapped out the exact mechanics of how to dismantle those pessimistic thought loops. This flowchart breaks down our reactions into 3 distinct nodes: A, B, and C. The A stands for adversity. Adversity is the objective negative event that happens to you. It's the traffic jam, the argument, the rejection. It is a locked data point that we often cannot control. But before that event creates an emotion, it passes through B, your belief. This is your internal filter. It's where your mind decides if the adversity is a permanent disaster or just a temporary hurdle. That filter leads directly to C, the consequence. As this structure shows, the final emotional or behavioral outcome splits down 2 completely different paths based entirely on the belief node, not the original adversity. Life will guarantee some adversity, but when you actively interrupt your automatic pessimistic thoughts at the belief stage, you decide how those events actually affect your life. With the negative roadblocks out of the way, you can start building Seligman's model of authentic happiness. This visualizes a 3-tiered hierarchy, starting at the foundation with what he calls the pleasant life. The pleasant life focuses on mastering positive emotions. It means you look at your past with peace, you look at your future with optimism, and you experience joy in the present moment. But relying solely on this bottom layer has a major flaw. Pleasure is fleeting. It spikes quickly, drops off fast, and gets derailed by daily stress. To build stability, you have to move up to the second tier, the good life. Here, the focus shifts entirely from temporary pleasure to deep engagement. Engagement happens when you hit a state of flow. Whether you are working, writing, or playing a sport, you are completely absorbed and highly capable in the task, losing track of time. Pleasure is enough to make a day enjoyable, but engagement is what makes a life satisfying over the long term. It provides a durable sense of accomplishment that doesn't disappear when the initial excitement fades. Which brings us to the peak of the model, the meaningful life. You cannot reach this highest tier in isolation. To achieve meaning, take the pleasure and flow states you've cultivated to serve something larger. It's about sharing that joy with the world. Think back to the trap of measuring your milestones against your peers. External competition drains you. True meaning comes from internal contribution. You build lasting happiness through these specific, active skills. By catching your pessimistic thoughts and intentionally moving from pleasure to a shared purpose,